Welcome to From Potential to Powerhouse, Success Secrets from Female Leaders, where female trailblazers share their journeys and the aha moments that made all the difference. With your host, serial entrepreneur and trailblazer herself, Tracy Holland.
Hey there, this is Tracy Holland, and you're listening to the podcast From Potential to Powerhouse. Today's guest, Orlena Blanchard. So do you use your hyphenated name? Is this your married name?
You know, Orlena Blanchard is my maiden name and married name, and I use all three names really to honor my father's legacy. It was really important to me. And crazy enough, I just legally changed my maiden name to be my official middle name. So I do use Orlena Blanchard, but I go by Orlena Blanchard.
I love that.
Thank you.
So Blanchard is your married
name.
And what do your kids go by?
So my kids all go by Blanchard. They're all, all Blanchard surname. And that was one of the reasons I took on my married name. Blanchard is my married name because I wanted us, it's just my thing. I wanted us all to have the same name. I wanted to have the same name as my children. And so I did that, but it was so important to me to maintain my African heritage, to be more visible in my name, because it's such an important part of my identity. So and especially I lost my father when I was in my 20s and in graduate school. And my father said to me when I was getting married, I will always think of you as Orlena first, Orlena Blanchard. And so I decided that would be what I would use for the long term.
Beautiful. Was he able to go to your wedding?
My father was at my wedding, but he died a year afterwards. So he was here on this earth long enough to see me wed.
Amazing.
And to have that celebration, because I'm the only girl. I have three brothers. And so it was very special. I got married in August of 1997, and my father passed suddenly in April of 99. So he was alive less than 18 months after I got married. So at least he saw that, but he didn't get to see the rest.
Oh, Did you get to say goodbye?
I did not. It was very sudden. My father, actually, interesting enough, he had suffered from cancer, throat cancer, but he didn't die from cancer. He died from the effects of treatment of cancer. He had radiation that damaged his heart because, from the neck down, right, is where the radiation was focused. And so most people don't know, for those who have lung cancer, breast cancer, throat cancer, radiation and chemo in that area can do damage to other organs because it's really poisonous. And so it kills the bad stuff, it kills the good stuff too. So unfortunately, my father had a massive heart attack as a result of surviving cancer, but unfortunately giving into the effects of it. So that was 1999, and I was just shy of my 26th birthday, and I was he died a week before my final exams, my first year of graduate school.
Wow.
So it was a pivot in my life.
Wow.
Pivot.
So let's back up, because I want, the intro that we do is going to introduce you and your bio, but I have to say that the inspiration that I have every time I talk to you and what you're doing, I would describe you as brilliant and gorgeous and Black and expressive and great and red, and one of the most well-educated women I know, one of the most powerhouse women I know. And this is if I'm describing you to someone who can't see this video, our video, if they're just listening to our podcast, and you're a change maker. I mean, you're really, really a change maker. And so with those descriptions that I just listed, how would you refine that, change that, modify that? What would your add to that? Mother?
Yeah.
What else?
Thank you. No, it's awfully flattering, and thank you for that. It's interesting how, and I think it's important for us to think about how others see us versus how we see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I usually start with, relationships are so important. So first and foremost, my role as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend, that's the primary role that really defines my life.
Mm-hmm.
And faith is also really important to me. So I feel like no matter what you believe in, understanding and believing that there's something greater than you that guides your life or your purpose, that's also my role. In my case, I'm a Catholic, I'm a practicing Catholic. And so that's also how I would describe myself. But I would describe myself as extremely loyal, extroverted. So I love I feed off the energy of people, and I love conversation, and I love learning. And so I think I am a perpetual student. Education is important. So I'm glad you said that. I'm educated, but it's interesting that I come from a family of, PhDs and a culture where, you go on to graduate school and get as many degrees as you possibly can. So the fact that I have an undergraduate degree and an MBA always seemed like it wasn't enough. I'm still contemplating a PhD. But at the end of the day, I think the way you describe me, I accept that. I am that, but I think I'm also loyal, determined, and focused. I'm focused in a way in my life that I haven't been before.
And so I think what would be so helpful is, why don't you describe, because I think just in 2020 being this pivotal year of change, what happened to our world economically, what happened to our world socially, what happened to our world culturally, what happened with the crisis with George Floyd, which was frankly a pivotal moment, but a crisis that's been ongoing for a long, long time, right? And this example of what happened to George Floyd was just one example. Why don't you talk about a little bit about Joy Collective and what you do today, and then we'll backtrack, because you are also an entrepreneur.
I am,
and we didn't mention that.
I'm an entrepreneur and a co-owner in a company called Joy Collective, and we are a marketing and communications firm, but we're also what we like to consider a purpose-driven firm or company. We're based in Washington, D.C. And while my business partner and I, co-owners, and she is the founder of Joy Collective, while we come from a background of working in advertising and marketing and media and in African-American media, we are really focused on marketing and communications work that's based in cultural understanding and that has impact on society at large. So we don't consider ourselves just doing work that's marketing campaigns to help businesses sell products. We help businesses create value and impact in the communities that they serve. And then the reward of that is that they build a relationship with customers and communities. And the reward is that their businesses do well and they grow and they sell product. But at the end of the day, we are very purpose-driven. And our claim to fame really has been, a lot of our notoriety has come from working on the Crown Act, which is, anti-race-based hair discrimination legislation. So it's fighting against hair discrimination that disproportionately affects Black people in this country. And we initiated on behalf of the Dove brand. They called us in to do some work to say, how can we, in a space that we know beauty is so inequitable across different groups of people and consumers, how can you help us create more equity and inclusion for Black women and girls? And hair discrimination was a topic they were talking about, and we decided to pursue it from an advocacy perspective. So a lot of our work is in social impact, and that's Joy.
It's incredible, because think about these large organizations, and I think for listeners, you should list, some of the clients that you work with, because the specialization of your particular agency and the way in which you approach helping executives and leadership within these large institutional organizations rethink how they communicate to a consumer, how they communicate internally, how do they can optimize the positioning of the brands in which they're considering launching or launching
Yeah.
to be more inclusive or to be more thoughtfully marketed. And I'm reinterpreting it as from our conversations.
Yeah.
But how, I mean, talk about a really unique and interesting business to have, right? I mean, you are an impact and social and cultural change maker.
Yeah.
And your business is getting paid to do that. And so that's kind of phenomenal, right? I don't know a lot of people who probably know a lot of people who do this. So walk us through exactly what that means.
Well, no, I appreciate that question. We are cultural experts, first and foremost. And I think in the world of business and brand, we have a tendency to be transactional. And I think what the last year has taught us is that business is people, and those who consumers are people. They come with their history, their sensibilities, their sense of identity. And so there's a psychology about that. And that is where market research is so important. And so many businesses, first and foremost, invest in market research. But getting data and understanding how that data translates to the way people think, the way they purchase, the way they make decisions is really important. And I think the last year has reminded us, for those who may have forgotten or for those who didn't know, has taught us that cultural identity, especially in the United States of America, informs your existence. It informs your lifestyle. And so that's so critically important. So what we do as cultural experts is help companies and brands truly understand what is it that makes a consumer's mind and lifestyle and community churn, and how you build an emotional connection to that. And so you were asking about the types of companies that we work with. We work with companies that are truly committed to not only driving growth economically or financially for themselves, but for doing good in the community and serving. So it's interesting because historically in the advertising world, at least in the States, targeting African American communities, Latino communities, LGBTQ communities has been a little bit more of an afterthought. You have a general market budget and intentional investment, and then everything else is it's nice to have or there's an obligation to do. And what happened in the past year, I think over the course of years, but it was punctuated after George Floyd, is that it's no longer a nice to have. To be considerate of your consumers or your audience's personal identity and experience, human experience, is critical to making a connection between your brand and those folks. And especially in the African American community, what we saw is Black people live an incredibly racialized experience in this country. And if you are a brand or a company trying to reach a Black consumer, you cannot ignore that fact. And so it gave us an opportunity to step in as those experts, especially with the Black community, to step in as experts and help companies begin to understand what conversations to have internally, and then what conversations and programs to develop externally.
Mm. And so how do you even begin that conversation with a new client as you're walking in? The sensitivities and almost the hypervigilance, and I'm talking about after George Floyd, but before George Floyd, and I can only speak as a woman who's been in multiple meetings over my last decade with being the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
And I'm raising capital or I'm pitching my business for the next big opportunity. And I'm sitting in a room amongst men, and I recognize that there's almost like a need for me to forget that I'm female in those circumstances in order for me to really be in my highest self. And to the extent in the beginning of my career, I would wear loafers and pantsuits. I remember I would get made fun of from my girlfriends who would say, "Do you have a pair of feminine looking heels?" Because I really thought that my power was in leaning more masculine in these meetings, because I didn't understand how to be in my feminine self. And at the same time, the last thing I wanted was someone to say, look how attractive she is, and make that somehow the point of focus rather than what I was there to do. So I'm trying to take that experience that I've had and somehow correlate it to what you're doing as a woman who's walking into these large institutions, which are used to lean primarily male, and talking to executives who may or may not be primarily white. I don't know. I mean, walk me through, what does it mean to be this kind of change maker in the way that you are?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think for women, there's such a universal experience in especially in the corporate world or in the business world, where we're expected to be more like a man, right? And we are taught, and I grew up in a very paternalistic culture. Nigerian culture was dominant in my home, and so even more paternalistic. And so this idea that we have to conform to be more like men, to be effective, to be heard, to be successful, I think is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think that it was nonsense or rubbish until my entrepreneurial world, until I was leading a company and helping grow a company. So I'm glad you said that, because it is exacerbated by the fact that I'm also a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an immigrant woman. I'm a mixed woman. I'm half British and half Nigerian. I'm raised across 3 continents. So I think part of it too, are folks are challenged, not knowing what box to put me in, but I use that to my advantage. What I would say to folks, and what I've learned, is to be very comfortable and very clear about who you are and what you stand for. And I will tell you, it took me, I am closer to my 50s than I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40 now. But it took me almost to my 40s to realize that I could stand in my femininity. I could stand unapologetically in my Blackness and show up as I am. And know that there are perceptions that will be a barrier to how people, the preconceived notions that would be a barrier to how people receive me. And I'm okay with that.
I love that.
And if I find that I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, that's a learning opportunity for me. But what I realize now is that if they're learning opportunities where I may say something that doesn't go over well, or I may do something that doesn't go over well, I attribute that to me, my personality, my approach, my style, less about the characteristics that define my gender or my race or my cultural identity.
Bingo.
And that's just me getting comfortable.
Right. But why did it take us to our 40s? I don't get it.
I don't know. I think it's interesting that you say that. It has taken that long, because 10 years ago, I was still trying to figure out, how to conform in a way that I would get the results that I wanted, according to what I thought somebody would receive well.
Mm-hmm.
You and I think, have talked a little bit about just mentors and having a tribe. And it's taken a few people in my life, I think, to help me get there. I did not come to that conclusion alone.
And so what was your mom like? Was she self-empowered? Did she stand in her femininity? Did she talk to me about your role model?
This is the beginning
as your
of
first.
This is the beginning of a book. It's interesting because my mom, who is just the kindest, most amazing human being I know, my mom has very typical British reserve. My mom is a professor. She's a professor still. She's in her early 70s and she's a professor today. So she teaches, but she's in the humanities. And my father was an engineering professor and comes from the sciences. And so I think I had watched and observed for a long time my mother accept my father's judgment and may he rest in peace and forgive me for being honest about this, but his judgment that my mother's work or chosen field wasn't as significant or as important as his as an engineer or in science. And so my mom, for many years, I didn't see her stand up as strongly as I see her stand up today. But she's standing up now, and I think post my father's death as a widow. And so, having watched my mom come into her own as an adult was definitely learning for me. But I think for a long time, I saw my mom as weaker in my parents' relationship. And so I tended to lean to the characteristics that I thought were stronger, which was my father and my older brother. And those characteristics I tended to revere. And they were more traditional male characteristics. It's also West African culture, Nigerian culture in particular. It's a little bit stronger, more aggressive, more confident. And so I tended to lean towards that. But I saw that and I thought, well, traditional female characteristics are not going to get you the type of success that you need. And they're not, I see them as weak. It's a lot of what we're socialized to believe, no matter where you come from. That's just the plight of our gender differences and inequality that we're all fighting to change. So I subscribe.
I so agree. I mean, to the extent that I used to believe in my 20s and 30s that I couldn't wear nail polish because I had to have natural nails because I was so worried that it would be so flashy and feminine and exude some kind of a feminine trait that was almost too sexy or too, and that would take away from the legitimacy of my education and my power, which I thought was completely needing to be rooted in this more masculine leaning approach.
Yeah.
So isn't that a wild?
It's crazy, right? Same thing. I will tell you, I did the same thing. I started my career in financial services. I was in the consulting world. I worked for what was, Anderson Consulting back then. It's Accenture today. And I was in financial services and I couldn't wear pants. I couldn't wear pantsuits. Could only wear skirts. And I remember doing the same thing, like how you wore your makeup, how you presented yourself, being very conservative. And I don't feel the same way anymore. So I think we're all evolving. I think we're a little bit more progressive, but we've learned along the way.
So as a teen, were you ever rebellious? Like, was there a point in time where the family thought we can't control her, Orlena?
No, I was not that chick. My brother was that. My brother was that guy. I actually, when I look back on it, I was very risk averse, very conservative. I was the one that in college, my father was concerned that I didn't socialize enough. But no, I was never a rule breaker.
Isn't your brother an entrepreneur?
My brother is an entrepreneur, and he was also a musician at one time. So he's one of those people who he was definitely made for it. I will say he was born with the entrepreneurial instinct. I developed the entrepreneurial muscle, which I think there are different ways to get there. But no, I was risk averse. I was not that kid. I was head down and trying not to get in trouble. And now I look back on it, I wish I did get in trouble a little bit more back then. I wish I had pushed boundaries.
So was that, in hindsight, do you think that's about this idea of trying to be perfect? Was there this thing about if I go off and do things I'm not supposed to do, then somehow there's a perfectionism thing? Or was it just like, I'm going to follow the rules because I follow rules?
No, I think it is exactly what you hit the nail on the head with, which is this sense of perfection and perfectionism, this desire to please, the desire to live up to an expectation. And I think for so long, and I still do in some respects, but for so long I wanted to be the model child. I wanted to be the perfect daughter for my father. I had a very close relationship with my dad, and part of it was honoring my heritage as a Nigerian. But I did. I think I wanted so badly to live up to this model of what the perfect girl or woman should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't push the boundaries as much. And I think some of those who do actually learn lessons earlier than I did.
I agree. I mean, I did all the things I shouldn't do. So I went the opposite route as you.
I'd love to hear those stories.
Much to my parents' dismay, but I got back on track. But so you went into college. Did you meet your husband in college, or where along the route did you meet?
I did, and even that is an interesting story because, I moved to the United States in seventh grade, right? Middle school or junior high school, whatever you call it. And so by the time I got to college, I'd lived in this country 5 or 6 years at that point. And I was desperately trying to find my place in the world as a mixed African immigrant in America, in the middle of Indiana, no less.
Ooh.
So my husband was one of the few at Purdue University where I did my undergraduate degree. He was one of the few. He grew up in DC, Maryland area that was different than what I found was the Midwest mentality. He had been exposed. DC is a very international city given the government, and so we met in college. Became very, very good friends. I married my college sweetheart. A few years after college, and we have been together now. It will be 30 years. Is it 30 years already? It was 30 years in last year. So I was a freshman in 1990. I'm aging myself. I was a freshman in 1990 at Purdue, and I started dating Warren my freshman year. And so it's been 30 years we've been together. Yeah.
And you still like each other.
We still really like each other. That's my dude. Yeah. That's what I realized, and because this quarantine with COVID will test your
anyone, right?
Anybody. And what I realized is I really, we love our family members. We love them, but we really like each other. I enjoy his company. He is my greatest advisor and mentor. And we're just really good friends. We always have been. We laugh a lot. And I think that's been key through this crazy entrepreneurial business life that I lead. And he's an entrepreneur down too. So it is definitely important that we like each other for the lives that we live. And we have 3 sons. So it's a bit nutty.
I have goosebumps because it's such a rarity to hear that.
Yeah.
And how beautiful is that you have a right hand, partner to bounce ideas and be entrepreneurial with and raise a family. And I agree that COVID has literally catapulted people into marriages who just met and started dating and now are I hear multiple people who are now living together, engaged or married as a result of this compressed, strange period. And then those mostly who have transitioned out because they've faced the reality that the person that they're with is no longer at their same frequency, or there's like a transition period where it just isn't working. So
yeah, I agree. But I would say, the one thing I always tell people when they look at my relationship history, my marriage, it's not all champagne and roses. I don't ever want to paint a picture. It's like every 3 years, it's almost like we go through this gut check. I still like you. Okay, check. But you go up and down because as individuals, you grow, you evolve, and we've grown up together in many respects.
Completely.
And it's worked. But I know many who it hasn't worked for. So I got really lucky. I'm very blessed.
It's so cool. And how old are your kiddos?
So my oldest is 18 and a senior in high school. So we just are going through college applications now. I have a freshman in high school, 14-year-old, and I have a 10-year-old. So I still have one that gives me big hugs. But I have 3 boys, all 4 years apart. It wasn't necessarily planned that way. And so, and I grew up with 3 brothers. And so it seems like it was designed perfectly. I am absolutely a boy mom.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so good. So did you have a paycheck at the time that you were having kids, meaning you were in a corporate gig, or were you on your own, or how did that?
All of them. So I've done a little bit of both. So I've gone through this series of corporate entrepreneurship. And so through, I think my first one, I was entrepreneurial.
Which
and
was what?
That was, so at the time I was consulting to a small technology startup that actually ran out of money the week before I gave birth to my first son. And I don't know if it was the stress of learning that was my last paycheck that sent me into labor at the time, like a couple days afterwards. So I learned on Friday that company had run out of money and the CEO had been taking out of his own pocket to pay us. And the next Tuesday I went into labor, and he was a couple weeks early. So he wasn't a preemie, but I wasn't prepared.
Right.
That was my first one. And then the next two, I was actually working in corporate. It was my time at TV1. So I was pregnant twice at TV1. I was there for 7 years.
What was your role there?
Oh, goodness. So when I first got to TV1, I was actually working in distribution marketing. So for those who don't know, TV1 is, a Black cable network.
Yep.
And I was doing distribution marketing. The company was very young, and we were trying to convince the world that Black people deserved more than just one channel, BET. and so I worked in distribution. So I was trying to convince cable companies to carry the network. I did grassroots marketing, I did consumer marketing and affiliate marketing in the cable industry. And then the CEO tapped me to run digital media because I had an engineering background, and it was that had always been my passion in the digital space. And so I ran digital media for my last couple of years at TV1. And so I had my second son when I was in affiliate and distribution marketing, and then I had my last son when I was head of the digital media department, and that was kind of crazy. But it was, I had, in the corporate world, I think it was great having that sense of security that you have a paycheck and, but climbing the corporate ladder, I knew in both instances that when I had my children, I felt something shift.
Right.
I felt my opportunities changed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can almost feel it, this seismic shift that people look at you or regard you differently. But I didn't, at the time, I cared, but I didn't really care. Like I took my pump to my office. I put a sign on my door. I would pump in the middle of meetings. People would laugh because I would be on a conference call. Everybody would be in a meeting room or the boardroom, and they could hear the pump going in and out. That's just the reality of what it is. And I don't feel like as women, we should be diminished or undervalued in any way, because frankly, we can do it all. We do it all. We've been doing it all for centuries. So what's different now? My kids have watched me through it all. This
is so important, because I remember literally telling the taxi driver from landing in New York, getting in the taxi, knowing I had to go straight to a meeting, I had to pump, telling the taxi driver, I need you to move your mirror up to the ceiling so I could pump in the back of the taxi before I get to my meeting, because when am I going to stop? Life doesn't stop, but your breasts are going to engorge if you don't pump.
Yes, it's kind of crazy, but that is the way that nature works. But you're right. I mean, when I think about my story, the accommodations that I've had to make, whether it is flying with your breast pump and having to sanitize an airport bathroom stall so you can, just the kind of things that you have to go through.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. But it's all made me who I am today.
So let's talk about the shift, because I think this is so important. So when you say that you felt like a shift, or that there was a perception shift, what was your interpretation of the shift?
Well, it's interesting because the most recognizable shift for me was when I had my last child, and I happened to be at the company at the time was going through a management change. So my CEO, who was also my direct supervisor, who was also my sponsor, he retired. And so a whole new management team came in. And I think me being out on maternity leave, some things that happened in planning that said, well, you know, she's off having a baby. There were some shifts that happened without me that were very relative to my role in my department. And when I came back, things had moved around. So even though you had new folks, you know, running the company and managing the company, I felt there was a different perception of the value that I could add. And the shame in it, Tracy, was that didn't come from men. It came from other women. And that was one of the hardest lessons I've ever learned. And things would happen to me that I sensed were very intentional. For example, I had a nanny that worked until 6 o'clock. So I had to leave at 5:30 every day. And I made it very clear, right? I don't want to be gone until 8 o'clock at night. I'll log on when I get home. But there were folks who would schedule 6 o'clock meetings just to see if I would move it, or it was almost like, it felt like being hazed.
Right.
And I resented it a lot of the time. It felt very intentional. Sure. And it was almost a test of my loyalty as to whether I was going to put my family ahead of how badly I wanted my job.
Right.
That's how it felt.
Sure.
You know? Now, of course, that's just through my eyes, but that's the shift. I felt a little bit less of a regard for my value.
Sure. So at what point did you decide to lean back into being an entrepreneur and leave corporate life?
So I had tried entrepreneurship before, and I had failed several times.
What's your idea of fail? What's my
idea of fail? For example, I left one job, my first job out of graduate school. I left after a year to try to start a record label with my brother and go into the music business. We had no background in the music industry. We had no money to invest in being in the music industry. And so failure was not understanding what it took to be successful, not fully understanding that, and spending enough time and money that we walked away from it after a certain while and I didn't really have anything to show for it.
Okay.
You know, so we made an album together. It's a fantastic album, all that good stuff. But did we make any money? No. Does anybody know that we did that? No. So in my mind, that was failure because we didn't reach what our goal was, which was to be superstars, right? It didn't work.
Okay.
So that's
a great story though. Do you still have the album? We still have the album, and I think my niece now will follow in our footsteps. So my brother's daughter is actually much better singer than I ever was, and she, you know, maybe he'll make her a star. But we do still have the album, and I still to this day believe it's one of the best. I wanted to be Sade. That was what I thought I was put on this earth to do, is be the next Sade. The fact that I'm saying that out loud is ridiculous. But that's what I thought. So that was failure to me. To answer your question about how I came to the entrepreneurial path, I left my last corporate job very sick, and I didn't know how sick I was. And so I had a cancer scare. I had a precancerous tumor in my colon. And I didn't discover that until 8 months after I left that job. And I left on terms where this is not working for you, this is not working for me, and departed very nicely. But I realized that under that stress, after I'd had my last child, I wasn't taking care of myself. I was losing weight and I couldn't keep weight on. And long story short, was diagnosed with with that precancerous tumor. I had to have very serious surgery. And so for all listening, please do your colon cancer screenings, get a colonoscopy. I was afraid of one, so I didn't do it. I haven't had one. I'm scared.
Okay. I will talk you through everything you need to do. I even have a video. I'm the face and voice of colon cancer prevention for one of the largest gastroenterology practices in the country. And the reason being is because I was probably about 2 or 3 months ahead of something very scary and very, very dangerous. So they caught it in time. And what that did for me was make me reconsider what I wanted my legacy to be. And I'll be 48 this year. So I was just shy of my 40th birthday. And I thought, I'm really not ready to die. And all I could think was Katie Couric's husband died at 41, 42, colon cancer. And that's where I saw my path. So when I had what I thought was a second chance, I really felt like I don't want to work so hard to make somebody else money. I hate to say it that way, but I really didn't want to work really hard for somebody else's personal gratification.
Wow.
I wanted to work hard and use my gifts and my talent and my intellect to do something that, one, made me, my family, and my community better, and to be better for the future. And that's something shifted for me in that. And after that, I thought, this entrepreneurial thing, I really have to make sense of it. So that was really my turning point.
And how were you out for a while with this? Were you on PTO kind of really trying to figure, was this your full-time job trying to figure out your health situation for several months, or how long
did it? No, I went through it. Okay, so this is my confession as a workaholic and a perfectionist. I left my corporate job and I decided I'm just going to consult and I'll be an entrepreneur, because I still wanted to use my mind. I needed to have that. And so it's funny, I left my corporate job on Friday, started a project on Monday, but it was just a part-time, it was actually a really great project, but I could take my time with. And so I ended up taking on that project and then taking on another project, all the while sick. So I'll be honest, the day I went into surgery, my client at the time had to say, do not answer her emails, you go away, turn everything off. So I like what I do.
Sure.
And so I was still working through it, but I was consulting, and I was consulting part-time. I was not full-time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I don't know. How much time did you take off for maternity?
Not much the first couple of times, but the last child I legitimately took 3 months.
That's amazing.
I legitimately took 3 months, which is, I also look back and I realized, like when I told you I felt that shift.
Yes.
I think there's the anxiety and burden that we feel as women when we have children, like you have to go back right away.
Right.
Because you may not have something to go back to, or you may be displaced.
Right.
So I took the chance with that one. And
that's awesome.
I took a good amount of time.
I know. If I could hindsight talking to myself, I took 13 days at the longest of my 3 maternity. I took a 13-day maternity.
Oh gosh.
But I always scheduled my C-sections for a Thursday so I could be back at the work at the following Monday, not the first Monday, but the second. So I'd have a 10-day, kind of a 10-day rest.
Grateful.
But I mean, who does that? Who schedules their C-sections on a Thursday so they can have like a long weekend?
I actually believe you're not alone. I was silly enough to, my first one was a C-section, but I was silly enough to believe that I could, have the other 2, naturally. And so I did that. I don't recommend. If you can schedule your C-section, go for it.
Right. I mean,
but no, you're right though. I think some of us are, especially successful women and very driven women, we feel like we can't afford, to take that time.
Right.
And so I think that's a learning for me as well. But I did take the time on the last one.
And it sounds like, God and spirit, I know you're faith-focused and faith-based, as am I, and that you had a second chance to reevaluate how you were burning the candle at both ends, to really reevaluate before things went south, where your physicality couldn't keep up with your stamina and your brain and all the things that you have in your momentum. It's like you were given a pause card that said, hello, take a second and really evaluate if you're doing what you should be doing. If you came to this earth to do this, if this is your purpose, what is your purpose?
Yeah.
And you got a reboot.
I did.
How amazing.
It was an incredible blessing. And it's one where I can look at what I do now at Joy Collective and I can see how my purpose has found its place.
Mm.
And I think I've grown into that purpose. I don't think I always knew. I wasn't one of those people who, I was meant to do this at 5 years old. I was meant to do this. I had a lot of things along the way I thought I was meant to do. But I have found a place through that and through the journey since I got sick to find that the work I'm doing right now with Joy Collective and our team is very much dedicated to making the world a better place for all of us, but especially for people of color. And for me personally, especially for people of African descent. And that is, like I said earlier, how I honor my father's legacy. I am absolutely my father's daughter. And so I had to explore after that time where my health was in question. I had to explore, what is my purpose from the perspective of what legacy do I want to leave? What do I want to contribute while I'm on this earth? And I realized in that moment that I had always had something in me about my identity as an African and as a Black woman, and how that has transcended different continents I've lived on, different places that I've worked, people that I've met. And so I realized for me, I have an opportunity to use my talents and my gifts to make the world more progressive and a better place and make progress for Black people.
Right.
And that's a lot of what we do at Joy. What our sweet spot really is helping create a better world and more inclusive world for Black people. But that's not all we do. We look at other segments of the population, but that is my sweet spot. And that's a lot of my experience. And I finally found a place where I can do that and help other people understand the importance of that.
And your business has scaled so beautifully because of your authenticity. And I'm sure, looking at the landscape, in terms of building your business and putting on your hat, I love the idea. And I think for all entrepreneurs, if you can find what it is you really love to do and then build a business around it and get paid for it and find a way to scale it, right? So there's actually kind of 3 or 4 buckets there, because I think we all start as entrepreneurs because of a passion and a drive to do something or build something or create something, and we have a vision for it. And then the next phase of that is, how do I get paid to do this?
Yeah.
Right. And then there's a lot around that. Like, am I getting paid appropriately? And am I excited about how much I'm getting paid for this? Should I be thinking bigger? How do I think about continuing to do what I love and be passionate without getting bogged down with all the day-to-day activities of what it takes to actually build the infrastructure of a business, which is a whole different set of skills and requirements. And then the question is moving into a scale-up plan in which you get to continue to go back to the original root of why you started and the passion that you had to start, the creative entrepreneurial passion, and making sure that you get to stay over in that sandbox and not get dragged into the, how do I scale and build, and what are all the moving pieces and parts that it takes to build the car, right? Because that's kind of a separate requirement, but a necessary one. So in where you sit today and what incredible impact you're making on these large institutions and consumer products, and the way we think about and speak to the Black consumer, the Latina consumer, and the way these companies and these organizations are starting to think about how to be appropriately focused as a consumer rather than an afterthought, right? Because that's an internal battle, then that's an external battle. Although I think that the momentum that's happening today is moving in the idea of niching down and being very specific about the customer we're speaking to as sales and marketing companies and consumer companies. That's what we're being challenged to think about all the time. So where do you see your journey at this point? If you were to fast forward yourself 5 years from now and be doing what it is that you love to do, how do you see yourself and Joy Collective growing and scaling? What's your vision?
It's a great question, because we're trying to realize that vision. And where we want to be is scale impact, right? So we work right now with companies like Unilever that have amazing brands like Vaseline and Dove Men Care and Axe and all of these that we have in our household. We're working with Prudential and Google Fiber, and we just we did a lot of work with WW. We've taken on so all of these companies that we work with. To me, it's being able to grow and build impact through these client partnerships. And that is what we see ourselves as Joy doing. The more impact that we can have, the more legacy we can build and inspire others to do the same. And things like the Crown Act, where we're helping build social action campaigns, where we actually see, the Crown Act is a modern civil rights movement. And so that legislative change, how we're connecting policy and legislative change to the idea of marketing and brand, and purpose-driven marketing. So I want to continue to do more of that. But for me personally, somebody really had to label it for me what my talent or gift is. And I have learned that I am a business storyteller. And I want to continue to help tell human stories that inform business stories. And what we have done since George Floyd is we've created a number of different programs at Joy, many of which I lead, a cultural immersion program, as well as a healing circle program. And we've done that for companies like Tory Burch and Stella and Dot and some and Unilever and some others. And the cultural immersion training is really about helping folks see the economic perspective of culture and race and gender and sexuality, but especially race. And if you understand the economics of that, then you can leverage that in how you run and grow your business. So my goal is to continue to do what we do at Joy, do it bigger, do more of it, but for me to continue to be a storyteller in every way that I can to help other business leaders understand the economics of culture.
And do you have any pain points as you look at being able to do that in your knowing your genius and then what your genius is as your role within this organization and growing it? Is there anything that keeps you up at night that says, I know where I want to go, I'm not sure how I'm going to get there? And do you have any mentors or resources do you have a pod or a team or someone that you can bounce ideas? It sounds like your husband is one of those.
Yeah, I have a few mentors, and let me answer you asked a couple of questions, which I think is fantastic. Yes, what keeps us up at night trying to get to the point where we are much bigger than we are now and having greater impact. And 5 years from now, we can see, we have grown multiples in size of clients and revenue. What keeps me up at night is growing the right way, not just growing. It's scaling the right way. And I think it's easier to start a business than it is to grow and maintain and sustain a business. And what I'm finding to be the biggest challenge is, as an agency, really, human capital is my greatest investment. It's my greatest asset. And hiring for capability, not just capacity, is really important. There's a balance in two. And so I am working through what keeps me up at night now is I could have a team of 50 people, but if I don't have the right people positioned in the right places with the right skill set, then I have huge operating expenses, but the value I'm delivering and the return on my investment is not the direction that I want to go in. It's not what is going to help us grow the business. So right now I'm struggling. I'm being really honest, is like my pain points are, how do I staff and grow for capability, not just capacity? And how do I balance that in a space where what we do as a business is very unique.
And high touch.
It is high touch.
It's high touch.
So I remain one of the lead strategists and cultural experts. But as we get bigger and we take on more work, I can't touch everything.
That's right.
And so I have to make sure that there are folks that are empowered and qualified to, or I should say qualified and empowered
That's right.
to take on that role. So that's my struggle right now, is how to grow and scale the right way. Because what I do recognize as an entrepreneur, when you have your own business, you could be, success is relative. You know, you could be winning lots of awards and gain a lot of notoriety and folks know your name, and you could be on the verge of imploding.
Of course.
And so, you know, it's finding a way to make it work and actually maintain your sanity in the process.
And just maintain your sense of self, right? It's like, then you have 3 boys and a husband, and by the way, I want to work out, and
Yes.
I don't want to get sick again. So the question of, you know, how do I replicate and grow when, you know, the client is so connected to you and what you can deliver.
Yeah.
And yet there's that unicorn phenomenon, right? Where the client is in love with the unicorn, and then you need to have multiple clients, and there's only one unicorn.
There's only one unicorn. So I'm learning to find those unicorns. But you did ask me another question that I apologize I did not answer directly, which is, do I have those mentors in my life? And yes, my husband is a great advisor and sounding board. But, you know, to be honest, sometimes I don't think we realize that we have mentors, not just above us, but at a lateral level and below. And I have folks from a business perspective that are mentors when I've made major decisions or transitions in my life, whether it was within the same company and I moved from one role to the next, or whether I left to, you know, be an entrepreneur full time. There are people that I lean on for their guidance. One person in particular happens to have had a very long-standing and recognizable career in human resources and change management. So it was always a great sounding board for me making decisions that came to, you know, job choices or roles. The other thing too is I've developed relationships organically with people who I just trust to tell me the truth and to challenge me. So some of my past clients are actually, I no longer work for them or with them, but people that I go to and I said, you know, pick me off the floor. I'm in a puddle on the floor. I'm going to quit tomorrow. What, you know, and said, no, you're thinking about this differently. So I have those people in my life. And then I have to be honest, Kelly, who is Kelly Joy Richardson Lawson. So she is the founder of our company, Joy. We are polar opposites. And that's a beautiful thing, because she, it's not so much as an advisory role or mentor role she plays, but she challenges me and pushes me. I'm risk averse. She breaks she's willing to push boundaries and break rules or redefine the rules. I won't say break rules, redefine them. And it helps me challenge myself to have someone that I work so closely with and that I communicate with so often, who makes me look in the mirror. And I think that's really, really important. So I do have a tribe, a squad of sorts that is a little bit of a hodgepodge of personal to professional over the years that I rely on for guidance and advice. And then if they don't have an expertise in a particular space as an entrepreneur that I am delving into for the first time, whether it's financing or, you know, looking at investment, then I look for those folks, or I turn to those folks that have had that experience that I believe I can trust and, you know, will have my best interest at heart.
Yeah, that's key. I think it can be lonely at the top, right? That is not a joke.
Yeah.
It can actually be a real phenomenon. And to remind yourself, and I think that the point of this podcast and the communication that we have with other female entrepreneurs is to really remind them that we know how it feels to be at that stage of where they are. And guess what? There's no there. What I found is when I've gotten my business to a certain size, or where I thought, you know, once I get to this revenue goal, then all our problems will be solved, because we're going to have more time and money, because all entrepreneurs run short on both of those things, one or the other, or those are big pain points. But what you come to find once you get your business to a certain size is there's a whole set of new issues, right? So you may have more money to afford more staff, but with more staff there becomes a whole nother level of challenge, right? To continue to keep your corporate culture, to continue to make sure that the people who are touching the customer, who may be 2 or 3 steps away from you in their day to day, are representing the same values and same ethos as what you started the business on, and who you are, and what you're represented by, or who you represent, who you want to be representing you. So there are just it's like the iterative stages.
Yeah.
There's no there. That's the one big takeaway, right?
That's it. That's it. And, I think, more money, more problems, right? I mean, that's real. We laugh about that, but that's real,
Real.
and when you are a business owner and you realize when you have employees, people's livelihoods, you internalize that people's livelihoods are based on decisions that you make.
That's right.
And that puts a certain pressure on
as
well. But I've found that for me, challenging my own, the imposter syndrome, I think, shows up for a lot of women.
Yeah.
And I have to challenge myself and remind myself that I'm in the position that I'm in for a reason. And that I've worked hard for that, and I deserve to be here. I had a friend challenge me a few years ago when I moved from my first home, which is a very small, little colonial house, to a much bigger, comfortable home that I could afford after a certain amount of success. And I felt so guilty, and I didn't realize I felt guilty. And she said to me, "You don't think you deserve this."
Wow.
And I realized in that moment, relatively speaking, it wasn't, my home is not that extravagant, but I realized for me that progress, I have to remind myself, I've earned it.
Right.
And I deserve to be here. And, you just have to remind yourself that you are worthy. And I think for women, we question that sometimes. And so continuing to do that and remember that, I've worked really hard to be where I am. I continue to work really hard. And whatever success is won, I think me living up to the potential that, at least in my faith, I believe I was destined for.
Yeah. I remember hosting at my children's new school, my first child's first grade party in our backyard. And I was still married at the time. And all the mothers brought their first graders over to have this party. And one of the mothers came to me and said, "Oh my goodness, your house is so beautiful. What does your husband do?" And I said, "Oh, he doesn't work." And she said, "Well, do you come from money?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand the question." But somehow insinuating that either, she couldn't fathom that it was not the income wasn't coming from him. And she certainly couldn't fathom it was coming from me. So I think she thought maybe I had inherited it. And I found that so interesting. I thought, wow, first of all, good for her for asking, because she said she was the truth teller. I'm sure she was representing whatever everyone else was maybe thinking but I also remember feeling shame, like embarrassed, thinking, should I don't really know. I mean, I don't know if I want these women to know that I'm the provider here for the family. I'm not sure I want them to know that I'm the breadwinner. I don't know if I feel comfortable having them in my backyard and in my home, realizing that all of a sudden I'm putting myself into a position of being vulnerable because they can see under the family hood.
Yeah.
And look at the engine and see what's happening here. And that was interesting. I remember that.
Isn't it crazy as women what we're up against? The beauty of in my home, there have been times when I'm the breadwinner and my husband, we're both working professionals. We have similar backgrounds. academic backgrounds and business backgrounds. But there are times when we have balanced and afforded each other. One person has room to be an entrepreneur while the other person is corporate, and we've traded off, and it seems to have happened almost organically. So when I'm in corporate, but to be honest with you, people look at me and say, well, she has this business that's winning awards and people are writing about it. But the lifestyle that we live and the flexibility and opportunities we have, to be honest, are based on years of my husband building wealth, right, so that I could invest in my business. Because the first couple of years of my business, both Kelly and I, we weren't paying ourselves. Right. We were both figuring out how to make income on the side as consultants while we were building this business. And so, finding that balance, I struggled with that. Like you did a little bit. Like, what do people think? Yeah. What are people going to think? But I love that I'm in a space now where I really just don't give a damn. Right. Like I finally come into that space where, doing what I'm doing, if it works for my family and everything is positive and legal and, it's good stuff. And as long as my husband is comfortable and I'm comfortable, then it's really nobody's business. And so I'm in a better space that way.
I totally agree. And honestly, 2020 has right-sized all these issues for us, right? It could not, the things we used to care about in 2019, I think are somewhat out the window going into 21. It's like the things that I used to be more worried about, it's like, my goodness, it's just right-sized the perspective. So
it is.
Orlena, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time. And I know that we've touched women out there who are figuring this out, just like we were at one point and at different stages. And so I just so appreciate your openness and your vulnerability and your willingness to be frank about what it took to build your business and build your career and be a mom and be a super powerhouse woman and change maker.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I have to tell you, I'm so honored to be here and I'm so proud of what you are doing, because if somebody could have given me some advice 10 years ago, as you said, if you could reach back just even 5 years ago and just give a little bit of a nugget, that would be helpful. I think it's so insightful and so generous what you're doing. So thank you for that. And I look forward to learning from all the other conversations that you're having, because we're all a work in progress.
Totally. And it's so much fun. It's such an honor. So thank you.
It's good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend.
Okay. You too.
Thank you for tuning in to From Potential to Powerhouse, Success Secrets from Female Leaders with your host, Tracy Holland.